So I want to thank everyone for coming. I'm John Resig. I'm the creator of jQuery. I wanted to talk a little bit about, I'm kind of assuming that everyone here has at least played around with jQuery and has used it. I wanted to talk about some of the things in jQuery that are lesser known and some of the more advanced features in the library. Hopefully you can start to consider how these might affect your applications and maybe use them and change maybe your style of coding. One of the points I wanted to touch on first is creating elements. So this is something that jQuery has provided for many years now. Just a simple way of creating a DOM element. Instead of passing in a CSS selector to the jQuery function, you pass in an HTML fragment. We take that fragment, we convert it into DOM elements. It's really straightforward. At least in this case, it's a direct map for create element. We check to see if there's a standalone element there, and we just do create element straight out. Whenever you have an element, though, typically you want to modify it. You want to attach some events. You want to add some properties, what have you. Typically, in jQuery, you might use some chaining, for example. In jQuery, any method will also return the jQuery set again. So in this case, you can attach a click event, well, in this case, a very worthless click event, to the DOM element, change its ID, add a class to it, and then presumably you would inject it into the DOM somewhere. In jQuery 1.4, we introduced a new way of essentially doing the same thing, replacing that sort of chaining there. Well, not replacing, providing an alternative to. So in this case, what you can do is you can specify an HTML fragment, and as a second argument, you pass in an object of key value pairs. In this case, it's for example, you can have a click or any other event, key press, mouse up, mouse down. And then you can also do IDs. Sorry, not IDs. You can do attributes mixed right in. So you don't have to say attribute ID. You can just say ID test. And then you can call other jQuery methods. So you can call, I'm trying to think of the other ones that are mixed in there. So there's bind, there's live. I'm always forgetting the full list. It's... And there we go. There's the full list. Value, CSS, HTML, text, etc. All the different properties you can set, in addition to setting attributes. So just sort of backtracking real quick, I wanted to sort of mention chaining a little bit more. So this is something. So I mean, jQuery's had chaining since when it very first came out. That's one of the features that I wanted right away, because it allowed you to write terse code, but it was still quite readable and obviously very functional. So in this case, what we're doing is constructing a list item that has an anchor inside of it. Naturally, this anchor doesn't actually have any contents or attributes, but we can go in and populate that. Now, the interesting thing about creating HTML inside the selector in this way, and inside the jQuery function, is that it returns the newly created elements. So because it returns those elements, we can traverse them, just as if they were in the document to begin with. So in this case, we can go and we can find the anchor that's inside the list item. We can modify its href. We can insert in a name. And the important part comes up then at this .end. Not many people know about .end in jQuery. And what it is because in jQuery what happens is it maintains an internal stack. And so anytime you call a method that returns a new set of elements, so for example, find, filter, next, prev, next all, siblings, all of those return new jQuery sets. And in all those cases, all those jQuery sets maintain a reference to the set from which they came. So when you call .end, it returns the reference back to where you came from. So it allows you to create these really long chain statements. Technically speaking, this is a one-liner. I broke it down for sanity's sake into a multi-liner. But in this way, you can actually, so we're going in, we're modifying the anchor, but then we're actually inserting the list item into the document because we use .end there. So in this way, you can actually write some pretty interesting complex code with jQuery and chaining in this manner. One thing that we do internally, this isn't something that you necessarily have to take into account in your code per se, but we do a pretty good job of caching fragments. So whenever you're passing in HTML to the jQuery function, or you're passing in HTML to append, prepend, methods of that like, we look at that HTML and we look at ways of saving a reference to that for later. Because the process of converting that string into a series of DOM nodes can be expensive. It's a non-trivial operation. So that's something that we want to reduce whenever possible. So one way that we're able to cache that is by using document fragments. Now, document fragments, we started using these in jQuery 1.3. And we've had very good luck with them thus far. And one way in which it helps us is that, so for example, this is a very crude approximation of what's going on in jQuery core. If we wanted to take a string, an HTML string, and turn it into a fragment, what we would do is we would take that string, we would set the inner HTML on that div, and then we would extract those child nodes back out and insert into a fragment. Now, what a document fragment is, it's part of the DOM specification. It's relatively rarely used. And what it actually translates to is it's a very lightweight wrapper for holding DOM nodes. And this wrapper, it's don't really want to call it an array. I mean, because it holds DOM nodes. It has like a first child and a last child. But you can use this, and you can insert this fragment into the page. And you can also clone this fragment. Now, what's interesting about this is that it's really, really fast. So for example, if we had 50 nodes that we needed to insert into the page, we could insert all those nodes into the fragment, and then we could insert that fragment into the page in a single operation. Or we could clone that fragment, and thus everything inside of it, in a single operation. And this is really, really fast. So this is what we do in jQuery core. And we got some really big speed boosts out of it. But what's really nice is that in jQuery 1.4, what we found out is that we were able to start caching it. So since we take all these HTML, bits of HTML, what we now do is say, we check this, if it's a short piece of HTML, less than half a K, no particular reason for that limit. We just picked it since it seemed like a good number. So we look for any HTML that's less than that size. And we see if it's been called, if the fragment has been generated multiple times. If that's the case, we start to cache the fragment, and then on repeated calls, we'll use the fragment directly. And that way, we're able to get even larger speedups in jQuery 1.4. So this has been really beneficial for us. Another thing in jQuery that we provide is the data storage API. This is an API that we use internally, that we at first used internally, but then we exposed it further so that developers and likely plugin developers could hook into it. So what's interesting about this is that this is different from attributes, for example. So with attributes, you would say, you could say attr test 5. And what would happen is that the 5 would be literally attached directly to the DOM element using the set attribute, the traditional DOM APIs. But with the data, what we do is we take this data and we keep it in an internal store in jQuery. So we have a separate store that is completely separated from the DOM elements themselves. And inside this store, we keep track of all this information that are attached to all these elements. Now, this is nice because, well, for a number of reasons, but the primary of which is that it helps you to both easily access the data that's in there, but also work around garbage collection issues. Because garbage collection issues are a very real reality of web development, especially if you're still targeting IE6 and IE7 like we are. So IE6 and IE7, they have very significant issues if you try to, or say if you attach a function, for example, to a DOM element, and that function has, for example, a closure pointing to another DOM element. It creates a reference, an unbroken reference, and you'll be leaking memory all over the place. That being said, using jQuery's data store is a way to completely avoid that. It also makes it really easy to clean up the data later. Now, one example I provide here is that, for example, in jQuery, we keep all the events that are bound to an element inside .data events. So if you're ever curious, if you wanted to pop open Firebug or the IE console or whatever developer tool you're using, you could find an element and say .data events, and you would get back the exact elements that are bound, the exact events that are bound to an element. Let me see if I can find an example. PubjQuery.com. I think there's a event bound to this. There you go. I think it's bound to the anchor. Maybe it's the li. I guess we'll find out. All right. Well, I guess we can poke around. We'll find out where it's being stored. So it's not on there. Oh, there we go. It's on the li. Okay. So in this case, this is the first li, and we can look and see exactly what events are being bound. In this case, we're using the mouse enter and mouse leave events in jQuery, and those are using the mouse out and mouse over events internally. But this is really interesting since you can dig in and see exactly what is being attached, and even see very specific things like what function was bound and other interesting details. So yeah, this is a good way of, if you're interested, of debugging your application. If you're curious what events are being bound to a specific element, that's one way to do it. So, but the really nice thing here is that since we manage all this data centrally, it makes it really easy to clean it up later. So if jQuery internally attaches data, or if you attach data, or a plugin attaches data, it doesn't matter. Like, we maintain it all centrally. Later on, if someone calls .remove on the element, or .empty, or sets the HTML, and any of the number of ways that an element can be removed from the page, we go through and clean up all the data that's been stored. So we manage all that memory for you, and we make sure that to keep everything very tidy. And so not only does it take care of garbage collection issues, but it's also very memory conscious. So this is something that we use a lot, and it's helped us to develop large applications, especially ones that are, let's say, long living, that you expect to be open for many hours on end, or even days on end. In those cases, you want to make sure that your memory is going to be recaptured over time. One thing, sort of as a prelude here to talk more about events, is that whenever you get or set data using the data API here, this, we also publish two events, the get data and set data events. We do this now in jQuery 1.4. Not many people use it right now, and for that reason, I want to remove it. But I'm hoping that if people show some really interesting uses for it, because we use this right now internally in jQuery UI, because we use it as a way of sort of overloading the existing .data method to be able to get and set data inside of a plugin. So for example here, when I say my plugin real value, you can act as a proxy to be able to get at the values stored internally in a plugin. So you could say if someone were to say, I'll just write it out here. If someone were to say data well here, let's pretend that we have a slider element and we make it a slider. This is hypothetical, but and then later on, someone says we want to change the slider value, the position of it to be 50, whatever that may mean. Maybe that means 50% or what have you. Internally, inside the slider plugin, it could override that setting of position. And it can say, okay, you're trying to set position. What that actually means internally is maybe set CSS style value to this amount and save the value over here and do other things. Maybe set a class value, maybe fire an event, whatever it takes. But in that way, the get data and set data events are a way to override that behavior so that you can implement real functionality or additional functionality on top of the getting and setting of the values. This sort of brings up the topic of, again, moving towards events, but of namespaces. I'll skip ahead really quick, so I'll talk about it with events first. So jQuery has the concept of event namespaces. This is something that we added in, I want to say like jQuery 1.2 timeframe. And because we were running across an issue that was coming up with a number of different plugin authors, which was whenever a plugin, for example, wanted to attach additional handlers to an element. So, for example, going back to the slider example, if they wanted to attach, mouse listeners or watching for a click or what have you, they needed to go back through later and remove that click. They needed to be able to clean up after themselves. Because after this, if you make it a slider and then you later on make it not a slider, they need to go back through and say, all right, well, that's not a click, so let's remove the click and let's remove the mouse listeners, etc. And the problem is that each plugin had to maintain references to every single handler they were binding everywhere on the page, which was a giant mess because that was causing all sorts of memory issues and memory leaks, and it became quite chaotic. So what we did is we introduced a rather elegant solution. Is you can now attach what we call namespaces. So, like for example, you can attach a click or a focus, and then you can say dot some name. And actually, you can say, and you can actually do multiple namespaces, just like CSS classes. So you can say dot name1, dot name2, dot name3, etc. Now, what's nice about this is that if you want to go through later and you want to clean up everything that you just bound, it's really easy. So in this case, we attached a click handler, we attached a focus handler, and then if we want to go through and remove all that functionality again, we can just say dot unbind dot the name. In this case, dot plugin, and that'll remove all the events that were bound that had that particular name. So this is a really just easy, I'd say elegant solution to this problem of being able to clean up after yourself at a later time. Additionally, jQuery has very powerful custom events. Now, this is something that we don't necessarily do any special code for. This is something that's sort of just taken care of internally by the existing structure of the events module. But with custom events, what you can do is, like in this case, for example, we're attaching an event called myPlugin to all the divs in the page. Now, it's not a requirement that that event actually exists. You can bind any event with any name to any element you wish. It just may never fire. So I mean, it's totally your prerogative. Now, the nice thing about this is that if you're trying to abstract your code in a way, and you're trying to keep your separation of concerns in place, this serves as a really nice way of communicating. Now, what I mean by that is that there are two ways in which one might traditionally communicate with an element. So for example, here, in this case, we have myPlugin. One way is if there was a method that someone could call. And they could call, or even a function. You could call my plugin and then pass in a div element. Right? That might be one way to do it. But the problem is that's a one-to-one relationship. So that for every single element, you have to call a function. So you have to do this, and you have to loop through and do every single one. And you have to be very explicit. You have to do it for every single div on the page. You have to keep track of them. The difference here is that when you bind custom events, it's a one-to-many relationship. So like, for example, here we trigger the my plugin custom event. And when we trigger that event, we don't know if there are any events already bound. Now this is important. There could be 0 events bound. There could be 100 events bound with that particular name. But since we don't keep track, so we don't have to know that there are any events bound, it works in a very graceful manner, much like jQuery does. Since jQuery, the jQuery itself, in this case, like, it doesn't matter how many divs there are on a page, that code will always work. There could be 0 divs, there could be 100 divs, and the code will just work or do nothing gracefully. And this way, it works much in the same way. You can have these events and communicate information across them in a way that is very smooth. And of course, you can go through and you can combine custom events together with namespaces. So much like the previous sample I gave before, here we have a remove event, which doesn't exist normally, and then giving namespaces to them. Now, what's interesting about this is that here we have 2 different plugins that are both watching for the same exact event. And when we trigger the remove, it's triggering it for both plugins simultaneously. So again, this is a really good example of that separation of concern. When we trigger the remove, we don't necessarily have to know that there are which plugins are being bound. And in both cases, it's going to trigger both the first plugin and the second plugin. So that's something that's just taken care of and something we don't have to worry about. So building on this, on top of custom events, is sort of what we call special events in jQuery. What special events are, it's a way, a much deeper way of implementing event functionality. And what that means is, so like for example, we use this internally in jQuery. We use this to implement the mouse enter, mouse leave, focus in, focus out, which focus in and focus out we added in a jQuery 1.4. And in the new submit and change events for Internet Explorer, which we added in, again, in 1.4. So what's interesting about this is that just to show you an example. So this is the implementation here of focus in and focus out in jQuery. And we provided a number of different hooks. There's setup, teardown, add, remove, and default. And I won't go into all of it here, but at least with setup and teardown, what we're actually doing is we're overriding the default behavior. We're overriding the default action of attaching a handler, and we attach our own handler, looking for the focus and blur events. And in those cases, we go through and we implement and we trigger our own focus in and focus out events in its place. So, and then we do this all throughout jQuery. So, we have our change and submit events, and those events are actually incredibly complicated. If you're looking for an interesting read, you can check that out in the events module in jQuery core. The submit event isn't that bad to implement. It's a little bit obtuse because the problem is that in an Internet Explorer, the submit and change events don't bubble up the tree, unlike every other browser. Because in the traditional event model, events go through a capturing phase where they come down the page, and then they hit the element, and then they bubble back up the tree again. But the problem is that since those 2 events don't bubble, it makes we lose out on that functionality to be able to use it for like jQuery Live, for example, which I'll talk about in a minute. So to implement that for submit, what we have to do is we have to watch for the user clicking on a submit button, and or watch for the user hitting the enter key inside like a text input. But for the change event, we have to go through and we have to track every single change that is done to every input in a form. It's really quite complicated and very frustrating. But if you want to, like I said, if you want an interesting read, I definitely recommend checking that out. So that brings us up to talking about event delegation. So event delegation, as I mentioned, again, in the event cycle where you have the capturing, hit the element, and then the bubbling phase again. What event delegation is instead of, for example, like if you had many forms on a page, one option could be to go through every single form and attach a form handler directly to every single form. That might be one option. But the thing is that may not be practical. It may be fine if there's like 5 forms on the page, but what if there's 100? Or more accurately, let's say you wanted to track, let's say mouse over and mouse out events for table cells in a table. Again, that might be fine if there's like 10 of them, but what if there's 1,000 table cells or 10,000 table cells? This is a problem that doesn't scale well if you're trying to attach these event handlers to every single element. So this is where event delegation becomes very useful. And what you end up doing is instead of attaching the event handlers directly to those elements, what you do is you attach them much farther up the tree. You attach event handlers to the table or maybe to the document body or wherever you need to do it. And what you do is you take advantage of the bubbling. So when the event bubbles back up the tree, you watch for that, wait for it to happen, and then you can interpret that and see where it came from originally. So jQuery provides some functionality that takes care of that. We have the live, what we call live events, and you can use live events to watch for events. And we also have delegate. Now, an interesting side effect from these methods is that not only do they work on all current elements, all elements that exist right now. So, for example, if going back to the table example, if you attached it to a table and then you added in some additional rows at a later time, you wouldn't have to worry about the event handlers. The event handlers would just work, even for the new elements that just got added in. So to show an example, so we added in the new delegate method in jQuery 1.4.2. So this was just the other week here. And what the delegate method does, just to sort of explain this, what we're doing is saying, all right, on the table element, attach a hover listener looking for a hover event on any TD inside the table. And whenever that occurs, we're toggling the class. We're toggling the class name. And so in this way, it's like I said, this is very efficient. We don't have to go through and attach the hover listener to every single table cell in the document, or I should say in the table. That would be hundreds, if not thousands, of them potentially. And we can attach just one listener and wait for this to happen, and then trigger that change. So and then it yields a very simple API. To show another example here of live events. So live is very similar to delegate, just a slightly different way of writing it. So because with delegate, we had, we say, okay, we're attaching to the table, we're looking for a TD. Here we're just saying we're looking for an anchor with a class of menu, and whenever that is hovered over, we're going to toggle the thing next to it. So in this case, we mouse over one of the menu items, and it just animates out. But if we add in a new item, that item will also animate. So that's really nice because we can just go through. We can only have to attach this event to the page once, but we can continue to add new items in at a later time, and it'll just be taken care of. So again, it's really the power of event delegation, is that not only is it really, really fast, but it also saves you from having to rebind events later on in the page. Another method that we added in jQuery 1.4 is the new proxy method. Proxy is a way of changing the this that is inside, that you see inside of a function. So in the case here, we have a method on an object, and we want to make sure that the this is kept intact. And so we provided, other libraries have this. This is also in ECMAScript 5. It's called a .bind, function prototype .bind. And so we added a simple way to do this in jQuery. One addition that we made is that when you remove the function, you can actually just call the function directly. You can just say object.method. Because traditionally, in different binding techniques of this nature, you have to save a reference to the second function that you just created, and that can be very expensive. Just to show an example really quick, not everyone knows that you can actually modify jQuery's internal selector engine. So jQuery uses a selector engine called Sizzle, which we released with jQuery 1.3. And went through, but when we constructed it, we also made sure that it was very extensible, so that it could be modified and you could change it to suit your particular desires. So for example here, it's a little plugin so that you could write a selector that looks like, you could say my plugin, like that, or you could say find all the divs that are my plugin, for example. In this case, what my plugin is incurring is that it's saying find everything that has the oh, that's not right. It would actually be correct syntax. It would be there. Yeah. So find all the elements that have a my plugin data attribute attached to it. This one's actually really, really old. It's again, I think this is probably like the jQuery 1.2 era. But I wanted to point it out because not many people know about it, which is that, so jQuery has the .load. You can specify a file to load, a URL to a file. And it'll take that HTML document, grab the body contents out of it, the contents out of the body, and inject it into an element on the page, or elements on the page. But after that file name, you can have a space and then specify a selector. So this is actually very cool, because what you can do is if you have a space in the selector, what we'll do is internally we'll grab that document, serialize it, traverse through, and look for any of the elements that you specify. So in this case, look for an H2, or you could say H1, or any other combinations you wish, any divs that are a child of a, whatever. It's up to you. So this is pretty cool, because you could be retrieving a very complicated document, but in reality, if you only want a small fragment and to be able to inject, you can do that very easily. So in this case, we can run this, and we can grab that H2, just the H2 from that other document, and insert it, even though the document has other content inside. So I really like this particular technique, because it's really quite empowering. Like, you don't have to change any server-side logic whatsoever. Like normally you would have to do that. Normally you would have to go in and maybe strip out the header and the footer, or say have a special query string that comes in that gives you a special document, or something like that. But you don't have to worry about that. You can just get it and you can just strip out exactly what you want and insert it in. Now the logic for this is actually very, very simple, because all that's happening here is essentially this. You would just would say URL file.html, and then on the success, we would just be inserting it into the page. And it'd look for H2s. So we say find all the H2s. Yep. That is 100. That is completely functionally equivalent to this here. Just to sort of give you an example of what the code might look like. One thing I wanted to talk about really quick. Now I'm sure people here are probably at least sort of familiar with jQuery UI, but I just for those of you who aren't, so jQuery UI is a set of components that we've been working on for a while now. containing all sorts of different functionality. In this case, we have tabs and sliders and different things. And we have jQuery UI 1.8, which is actually coming out today. It'll be coming out later tonight, fingers crossed. So that includes button and autocomplete as well. One really cool thing about jQuery UI is what's called the theme roller. And the jQuery UI theme roller, it's a way of completely styling these components to match your application, making sure that it matches the particular theme and styling. So I just wanted to show an example here really quick. This is the jQuery UI site. You can go and check it out. There's lots of, there's demos and documentation. Just to show you here, the example here. So here's a dialog. It's pretty typical stuff. Dialog. You can resize it and close it and what have you. But so here's the theme roller. So the theme roller, you can see here all the different components that are in jQuery UI. We have tabs and a date picker, things of that nature, accordion. We also have a gallery of different themes that you can use. This one's a little bit more, I think this one's kind of Windowsy. I know we provide different themes that you could use to plug into your page. Here's a very, very green one, if you were so inclined. But what's interesting about this is that you can go in and completely customize the look and feel. So if we wanted to change the background color of this particular element here, we could go in to the color picker, and we could probably pick something, let's say purpley, and then we could see that, and it updates there in real time. We could even change the color. Let's change the header next. I guess it'll be for that header. We can make it red. This is going to be hideous. But yeah, but you can change the look and feel. You can even specify textures and exactly what style is going to be used. But what's cool about this is that it gives you a single style sheet to use and a single PNG to use on your site. Or not a single, a couple PNGs, but they are all nicely sprited, and they are all in PNG 8 mode, which means that they even work back to IE6. So they will work in likely every browser that you support. So in this way, you can download the theme, and you get a nice zip file with all those contents in it, and you can use it to style your components. So this is something that's pretty cool. Additionally, there's different jQuery plugins that use this. So for example, there's one plugin called jQGrid. It's a grid plugin that uses jQuery. So to show you an example here, jQGrid also uses the jQuery UI theming. So let's just show an example here. So here's a particular grid. And one nice thing about the theme roller is that there's actually a bookmarklet for it. So we can click the theme roller bookmarklet, and we can pop this into the page. And like I said, they're using the theme roller styling here, but this isn't a jQuery UI plugin. And we can go in, and let's see what we want to style here. Let's see. Oh, we can see we can go to the gallery. We could probably pick, we can pick an orangish theme. I don't know, we can find something that more closely matches the particular styling of our website, and everything just switches automatically. And then again, right there, you can download the full theme, all the CSS, all the images, and it's just ready to go on your website. But it's nice because since you can go through and you can actually, again, you can edit it in line. You can customize it and tweak it to match your own particular site styling. Another thing is that that I recommend a lot is pulling jQuery from a CDN. CDN stands for Content Delivery Network. And traditionally what that implies is it's a series of servers that are geo-positioned strategically around the globe. There might be one in one in South America, one in Australia, one in Africa, a couple in Europe, a couple in North America. It's scattered around as close to your users as possible. So jQuery, for jQuery project, we actually have our own CDN, graciously donated by Media Temple. We love it. We're abusing it very heavily. If you pull a copy of jQuery, for example, from code.jquery.com, you can get that's pulling from our CDN. But also Google and Microsoft also have their own CDNs. Microsoft's been hosting jQuery for a while now. I think that was mentioned in the keynote. And those are other options. They have their own CDN, their own networks, and you can pull those files from them. But additionally, not only are they geo-positioned, which is great, but they're also minified and gzipped. Now, minifying and gzipping your JavaScript code is the best way to transfer your JavaScript. Absolutely. Because when you do this, it is the absolute smallest file size possible. So the first step, now I should say this is the best way to ship your production code, not necessarily your development code. For your development, you should just leave it uncompressed. So the first step would be to minify. There are different minifier applications. jQuery uses Google Closure, which was released just like a month or two ago. It was fairly recently. There's YUI min, which jQuery was using previously. And then Packer is another one. And traditionally what these minifiers do is that they'll go through and strip out all the comments and white space, and they'll make optimizations to try and reduce the file size as much as possible. So this is a really great technique, and you can usually have the size of your code just by running it through this. Additionally, you can go through and gzip the content down. So this is usually something you do on your server. So in Apache, you might use something like mod deflate, or it's going to depend upon your whatever web server you're using. But for jQuery, for example, we go from over 150K in that uncompressed state and reduce it down to only about 20K in the final end. So I mean, that's a huge reduction in file size. And that's absolutely something that you should be doing in your own JavaScript code. And again, if you pull jQuery from a CDN, it is already minified and gzipped. So that's something you don't have to worry about. Skip that. So to talk a little bit about what we're working on right now, we're working on a rewrite of the Ajax code base. We want to make it much more extensible. We want to make it so that make it for plugin authors to be able to snap in new functionality, new ways of doing transmissions and requests. We're also working on a dynamic script loader, working in ways of doing dependency management as well. And we're working on templating, which was talked about today in the keynote, doing ways, having either easy ways of writing templating plugins, or and also ways of maybe even shipping templating directly in jQuery core. But probably biggest is we're also working on mobile support for jQuery. This is a huge undertaking, and what we're doing is we're actively testing jQuery against different mobile devices. We're not shipping a separate build of jQuery. We're still only going to ship the one main jQuery build. But what we're going to do is we're going to guarantee that build of jQuery is going to work on all the mobile devices that we support. So this is something that we're working on right now. We're figuring out the full list of mobile devices that we want to support. But we're definitely going to be supporting the different WebKit-based devices, the iPhone, the Android devices. Definitely supporting Windows Mobile. The big questions for us right now is if we're going to support, for example, the current version of the BlackBerry browser. The current BlackBerry browser is really, let's say, it'd be generous to say it's really bad. But the thing is that they're working on a new one that's WebKit-based. So we're trying to decide if we should just wait, bide our time and wait till the WebKit one comes out and then go for that one. And then there are other browsers which we're struggling with. Like, for example, Opera Mini is really popular, which is fantastic, but it doesn't support JavaScript. So it doesn't do anything for us. So there's Opera Mini, and then there's Opera Mobile. Opera Mobile does support JavaScript. And so we may try to support that one, but it's an older version of Opera. So it's a very tricky landscape. And again, we're only trying to support the devices here that reasonably support JavaScript and the DOM. Obviously, there's a lot of really old phones that we cannot feasibly support. So again, we're working on that right now. We're getting testing in. But what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to guarantee that the jQuery you get from jQuery.com will not only work on all your desktop applications and all your desktop browsers, but will also work in mobile devices as well. And and hopefully that'll just be something that'll just work. So that's what we're hoping to get out of that. So just a little more information about the project. We post updates to Twitter frequently. We're also having a conference next month in the Bay Area, down in Mountain View. So if you're interested in that, I definitely recommend. We're going to be opening registration for it at 10 a.m. tomorrow. So I definitely recommend getting in. It usually sells out very quickly. And we're also doing a series of workshops as well. So yeah, I think I'd like to open up for questions now, if there are any questions. There are the microphones, they're positioned, and yeah, okay.
Hi, John. Thanks for coming. So I think I've heard you mention before that you wanted to open up, make it easier for developers to contribute to jQuery, and do that over the web through a tool like Bespin or something.
Yep.
Could you elaborate on that and maybe tell us how it's going?
So I haven't been able to start development on it yet. I've been swamped with jQuery 1.4 and stuff. But so sort of my vision is that like right now it's really hard for new users to contribute to jQuery. For example, you have to first download Git, install it, get the permissions all set up to work with GitHub, get a GitHub account, and then do a fork of jQuery. I mean, it's like 15 steps long before you can actually start committing code back to jQuery. So one thing that I want to be able to do is to have a web-based editor that a user could go to, and if they see a ticket they want to fix, they can say, yes, I'll fix this. And up will pop a full checkout of jQuery. They can edit it and just say, I'm ready for review. That'll come straight to the jQuery team. We can review it right in the browser and approve it. And that'll be the entire life cycle will take place in the browser. At no point will the user actually have to interface with a revision control system, which is, I think, would be ideal. So yeah, this is definitely something we want to do. It's something that I think we'll probably get. I'm working with a dev team out of Boston, and we might get like a college intern to work on it this summer. But because it's definitely something that I want to see, and I think it'd be really useful, and not only for jQuery but for a lot of projects.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yep.
Hi. Last time I checked, the latest version was 1.4.2, yep. But the latest VS doc was 1.4.1.
Yep.
Who's responsible for the VS doc? Is that Microsoft?
Yeah. So they try to keep it up to synced up. I think 1.4.1 is what's shipping in Visual Studio 2010. Because I think the cutoff date was like right in between 1.4.1 and 1.4.2. Regardless, though, I think that they're definitely going to be continuing to update it and resync them. But yeah, that's not something that the jQuery team does directly. Yep.
Is the VS doc available through the CDNs besides Microsoft's, like yours or Google's, or?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, it's definitely on Microsoft's. But I mean, I don't think we host it on ours. We used to a while back, but it just became more efficient for them to do it, especially since they were fast enough already. So, yep.
Yeah, hi, thanks for coming. Kind of new at this jQuery thing, and this might be a 1.0 question, but what's the best way to select text nodes?
So jQuery pretty much intentionally doesn't allow you to select text nodes, simply because a lot of the operations in jQuery don't make a whole lot of sense against text nodes. like CSS or add class or animations, or like there's actually very little that actually works against a text node. So in fact, the only method in jQuery that allows you to select a text node is contents, the contents method. So if you were to say, as an example, some element.contents, that would return all the text nodes and elements contained within that element. Granted, I'm not sure what you would want to do with it after that. I mean, the problem then, because usually the problem becomes is that we could provide different text selectors, text node selectors, but again, the number of things you can do is very low. Usually the only things you're doing are either removing them or wrapping them in something. And like content solves the wrapping thing at least. You can say, wrap all, etc. Or you could say, well, I guess to remove them, you can remove them. I mean, but again, so yeah, we don't provide a way to handle it explicitly. I know there are some plugins for doing text selection. I haven't looked at them recently, but I have seen them. Yep. Wait, just to go back really quick, when you say text node selection, did you mean selecting text nodes or like getting the selection area of like the user's cursor, like they select something with the cursor? Okay, just make sure. The second problem is a whole other thing, and that's also very hard to do. That's in the whole realm of WYSIWYG stuff, and that's a whole mess there. There's a reason why people don't or shouldn't try to write WYSIWYG editors. And if you've ever met anyone who has written a WYSIWYG editor, you'll see the haunted look in their eyes, and like they're dead souls, and yeah, I'm not going down that route.
Yeah, I noticed in your samples that when you create a DOM element, you just you put in the tag and then you use the attribute to create the ID and the class. What's the benefit of that versus just inlining everything?
So there's a couple advantages, disadvantages. One is that it's you can want to try and if you're creating a whole ton of them, for example, there's a couple strategies for doing that. One is building a massive string and inserting that wholesale. That's probably the fastest way because you're building one string, you're just doing string operations, and you insert that string and you're done. Another option is to go through and take advantage of the caching I was talking about earlier. So, for example, if you had LIs, and then you went through and then you set the ID to something, and then you set the text value to something, and then you inserted it into the document, something like that. So that. And then, but let's say you were doing that like 500 times. That would actually likely be faster simply because we're able to heavily optimize that initial create node operation. Because otherwise, if we were doing, I should heavily cache that operation. Otherwise, if we were doing, something like plus something plus, and then have the text go in here, and then we said append to test, something like that. We wouldn't be able to cache that string since it's unique every single time. So so I'm saying this now, but I don't like to give performance ultimatums. Because, like, for example, this didn't always used to be the case. It wasn't the case before 1.4. And I remember I was watching someone's jQuery talk, and they mentioned this. They're like, oh, append to is slow. It's slower than using append. I was thinking about that. I'm like, that shouldn't be the case. They should be the same, at least. And so that made me upset. So I went and changed the code. And now append to is faster. And so... But at least in the case where you hit the caching. So So I just want to take this time to say that, so yes, this could be faster for if you're doing a lot of them dynamically, but test it in your own code. Whip out the Firebug profiler, whip out the IE profiler, and make sure that that's actually the case for your code. Because it may not always be the case. Like I've seen blog posts where people are like, "Oh, this is the fastest," and it's not always. And it may not even not always from application to application, and not always from release to release. So again, yeah, be just if you're concerned about performance, be diligent and test your code. Yeah. Real quick. Yep.
Right now, jQuery is around 150K on zip.
Yep.
And as I've seen, quite a lot of size takes just workarounds for IE6. Do you have any plans to release something light version of jQuery that just eliminates IE6?
So you're seeing particular fixes for IE, not IE6. So the problem is that the JavaScript engine that's in the JavaScript and DOM engine that's in IE6 is virtually identical to the JavaScript and DOM engine that's in IE7. And in fact, IE7 introduced 2 new bugs. So we got that. So yeah, because they gave us the new XML HTTP request object, and 2 new bugs were introduced on top of that. But that was the only change from IE6. IE8 made some DOM and JS improvements, but none of them fix any of the bugs that we work around. And additionally, IE8 ships with the dual rendering engine. So they ship with the IE8 rendering engine and the IE7 rendering engine. And so if a corporation, for example, specifies that everything be rendered with the IE7 engine, then it's IE7. So, I mean, the question we get is, when is jQuery going to drop support for IE6? And we're dropping support for IE6 when IE7's gone, and by extension when IE8 is gone. It's going to be a long time. I mean, and I just there's no way I can reasonably say that I'll probably be dead before we drop support for IE6. Is what I'm going to say. I mean, like, it's going to be around for or if not IE6, the IE6 legacy.
Yeah, using the new name value pair format.
Say again?
Using the new key name value pair format to construct an element.
Yep.
How would you do a bind or like a live event?
So you would do with the bind. So if you had li, and the bind traditionally you'd say click. It's right there in line. They're all top level.
Custom element.
Or a custom event?
Custom event, yeah.
Yeah, so this actually just came up in the bug tracker. Hang on a second. Yeah, because we don't add in bind yet. And someone was asking about that. How do you bind in? So in 1.4.3, we're going to have, you can say, custom function. I'll write that down. I'll make sure that's in because no, there's a ticket open on it in it, and I remember someone mentioning that. They're like, "How do you bind custom events?" And I was like, "Yeah." So we'll get that fixed up. The same thing. We're live as well. Yep. Any other questions? Oh, I think we're out of time. So yeah, thanks a lot for coming. If you have any other questions, feel free to come up and ask. And thanks a lot, everyone, for coming.